kalikasan at isulong ang kabutihan. Karapatan ay ating ipaglaban, sang nilikha ay aalagaan. Sabayan ang ikot ng mundo sa pagpantay ng pagbabago. Halina't lumahok at manindigan, buhay at kalikasan ay ipaglaban. Sabayan ang ikot ng mundo sa pagpantay ng pagbabago. Halina't lumahok at manindigan, buhay at kalikasan ay ipaglaban.
Nakakabahala ang mapanirang epekto ng bombings sa mga komunidad kung saan hindi lamang mga kabahayan at tao ang naapektuhan, ngunit pati kalikasan, lalo ang ilan sa mga key biodiversity areas sa ating bansa. Ngayong araw na ito, tatalakayin natin ang kaganapang ito. Ako si Pia Noriela Bastilla at welcome to Green Faith. May dalawang bomba na hinulog ang AFP gamit ang drone sa Mount Katarungan in Barangay Lobo, Cantilan, Surigao del Sur noong May 11, kung saan matatagpuan ang kagubatan ng kabituonan na bahay ng may 23 species na endangered trees. Kasama po natin ngayong araw si Mr. Jon Bonifacio, ang National Coordinator ng Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment. Welcome to Green Faith, Sir Jon.
Hello, sa lahat na nakikinig, maraming salamat sa pag-invite sa amin dito sa program na to.
Okay, thank you for, salamat sa pagpapa-unlock. So, you are the National Coordinator for the Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment. Pwede mo bang makwento sa amin kung ano itong Kalikasan PNE?
So yung Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment, isa kaming nationwide na network of different environmental groups, grassroots organizations, and sectoral organizations that are all fighting for, people's rights and of course yung environmental rights rin natin. So one of the things we look into is of course yung impacts ng iba't ibang mga sectors such as mining, reclamation, and renewable energy even dun sa ating kalikasan. Pag alam talaga kung ano yung mga nangyayari, of course, linking with communities on the ground. And one of the issues that we have looked into in recent months is yung escalating number of bombings that have taken place actually in different areas of the Philippines and what this could mean for yung yung biodiversity natin dito sa Pilipinas. Bilang alam naman natin lahat, yung Pilipinas ay isa sa mga pinaka-biodiverse na mga bansa sa buong mundo. So it's really alarming na may nangyayaring ganito, and we're looking into what could be happening in these places na binobomba nga.
So before we dwell into that, balikan muna natin. Na-mention natin pareho yung KBAs. Can you explain ano yung KBAs or Key Biodiversity Areas?
So these key biodiversity areas are areas na dinedesignate either by international groups, minsan kasama rin yung national government mismo, mga areas na nakikita na maraming iba't ibang endemic at endangered na species na for the most part, yun nga, dito lang mahanap sa ating bansa, sa Pilipinas. So minamarking areas na to para alam ng mga researchers, alam rin ng tao in general, ng general public, na these areas should be respected and these areas should be conserved and protected dahil may mahalaga silang role in terms of local ecosystems, ecology, and of course ultimately dun sa mga communities na nagde-depend dito sa mga areas na to. So actually, a lot of different areas in the Philippines are registered as key biodiversity sites. Areas from, for example, Manila Bay, different parts of Mindoro. I'm just only giving a few examples kasi halos lahat ng islands dito sa Pilipinas ay may mga key biodiversity sites. Kasi yun nga, alam naman natin, sobrang biodiversity dito sa Pilipinas. So it only makes sense na talagang a lot of these areas kailangan i-conserve, kailangan i-protect.
So na-mention mo, composed ang Kalikasan PNE ng iba't ibang groups sa buong Pilipinas. Tama ba yun? Okay.
Yes po.
Paano kayo nakakuha ng mga groups? Paano sila nagiging part ng Kalikasan PNE?
Typically, yung mga gusto naming i-link up talaga ay yung mga groups on the ground. So community organizations that are working and typically, usually, fighting against yung mga destructive projects, for example, mga mining or logging or plantation expansion. So yun yung gusto namin talagang mag-link with, and we reach out to them actively. But on top of that, of course, throughout our 25-year history, ay marami na kaming mga na-establish na medyo malalakas na linkages with different groups, lalo na dun sa level ng national groups. So we work with national level na peasant organizations, fisher folk organizations, church groups, even other NGOs and civil society groups who all have different advocacies. But at the end of the day, marami dun sa mga advocacies nila na may concern dun sa environment. So yun po yung silbi namin siguro sa Kalikasan, linking all of those different advocacies together and putting forward kung ano ba yung kailangan nating mga pagbabago or kailangan nating mga developments in terms of environmental conservation and protection.
So you mentioned 25 years. So ano yun, 1998 ba na-establish?
1997, yes.
1997. So kailan ka naging part ng Kalikasan PNE?
Actually, just last year. Kaedad ko actually yung Kalikasan. Trivia lang yan. So yun, it's really good to be part of an organization na may mahabang history nga dito sa environmental advocacy. And yun, given konting background lang, galing rin ako dun sa climate movement, the youth climate movement dito sa Pilipinas, and I saw na yun nga, groups like Kalikasan were doing a lot of good work. So I ended up here, where I am right now, and learning more about the environmental issues that Filipinos face.
So parang you look very young.
Yes,
No? Ang bata mo pa.
25
Ilan ka na
years
ba?
old, yes.
If you don't mind. 25. Yeah, you're young.
Yeah.
So, naging ano mo na talaga, kasi nasa development work ka. Ito na talaga yung fashion mo? Be in a development sector.
Actually, dati I was planning on becoming a doctor. Pero I found out a few years ago na lulubog yung UP Manila due to rising sea levels from climate change. So that really changed my perspective about things. And ultimately, that led me down the path towards climate and environmental advocacy. Moving towards here I am right now, na I do this, ito na yung full-time work ko, essentially.
Okay, again, balik tayo dun sa issue natin, no, na can you expound on that? Ano yung nangyari doon sa Surigao, particularly sa Mount Katarungan in Barangay Lobo, Cantilan, Surigao del Sur, noong May 11?
Ayun, so that's just one of the incidents that have happened recently when it comes to AFP bombing. So the details of which may nabanggit ka na, of course, and of course may certain understanding na rin tayo dun sa impacts niya, yung ilang mga different species of trees and other living things that have possibly been affected by this bombing. Pero of course, when it comes to further detail into what the actual impacts are, yun yung talagang kulang. And I think that's something that is shared with other incidents of bombing that have taken place. So including that incident, if I'm not mistaken, 11 na total yung mga bombing incidents na nangyayari in different parts of the Philippines. So ever since stepped into the presidency si Marcos Jr., which is a bit alarming kasi a lot of these cases are actually cases of indiscriminate bombing. And on top of that, based on our research and data, ay marami sa kanila ay nangyayari either inside or adjacent to key biodiversity areas, protected areas, national parks, even, na of course we can't even begin to comprehend talaga ano ba yung pwedeng mangyari kapag may mga ganong klaseng mga indiscriminate na military operations that can potentially affect not only the people who are living in the area but also the biodiversity. We can just look into an example a few years ago na there was an instance in Bukidnon, I believe, na an AFP bombing caused forest fires in an area in Bukidnon, which can only mean na marami talagang nawalang biodiversity, all these different things na hindi lang overnight magre-recover. It will take years and even decades for that to recover. So yun yung posibleng mangyari or posibleng nangyayari na nga. And the thing is, medyo nahihirapan rin tayo dun sa pagkuha ng information. So as you mentioned, it's actually good that we know that there's an incident in Surigao na nagkaroon ng bombing. Pero in terms of the depth or parang gaano kalalim yung pag-unawa natin dun sa impacts, siguro yun yung kailangan pa talaga nating i-push na magkaroon ng more research.
So ito ba yung laman din nung inyong press release na noong May 25?
Dun sa aming press release actually ay mas kinover namin yung buong scale ng nangyayaring bombings. So looking at the trend na there have been a lot of indiscriminate bombings, and this has caused dun sa account namin at least 30,000 people have been impacted by these, pinapalayas or nagsa-self-evacuate from their communities due to these bombings kasi of course they also have social impacts. But on top of that, yung nakita rin naming information is up to 500,000 hectares worth of key biodiversity areas or protected areas ay possibly under threat due to this very indiscriminate and very unconscious or parang hindi talaga pinag-iisipan na approach when it comes to these kinds of military operations, that at the end of the day wala naman napapala. Talagang natatakot lang yung tao, talagang nasisira nga yung kalikasan natin. So there really needs to be a lot more, I don't know, at least with the AFP, kailangan talagang mapag-aralan nila kung ano ba talaga yung scale ng impacts ng ginagawa nila. Kasi at this point in time, talagang it's not doing anything but terrorizing people and of course yung destroying our environment.
Yeah, so na-mention mo nga na kumakala pa kayo ng mga data at mga information tungkol sa status ng KBA, no?
Mm-mm.
Yes, yung pinaka-recently, lalo na yung pinaka-recently na bomb. So, pero sino yung tumutugon dito? Kayo lang ba? Meron bang ibang mga organizations na tumitingin din dito sa issue na ito?
Unfortunately, I think based sa pagkakaalam ko, kami pa lang, which is a bit alarming. Kasi when you think about how biodiverse the Philippines is in terms of plant species, bird species, mammal species, and all these different kinds of biodiversity na essentially binayayaan tayo. It's alarming na a lot of this information flies over the heads of other groups, and I think it's really important that we start getting together and understanding na posibleng may malaking impacto dun sa biodiversity natin, especially if we let institutions like the AFP keep doing this na wala talagang accountability or wala talagang hindi naman pinapayagan yung mga independent missions which we tried actually participating in one in Cagayan where there were a series of bombings that took place. Hinarangan kami, hindi kami pinayagan na pumunta dun sa areas na potentially impacted by the bombing. So these kinds of incidents, of course, make it clear na very intransparent. So we can't even understand the scale of the impacts. I would like to think na minimal, pero yun nga, we've had track records of like forest fires being initiated by these bombings. Based nga dun sa data na nakalat namin, 7 potentially affected na key biodiversity areas and reserves dun sa some 11 incidents of bombing that we've recorded, and up to over 60 different species, endemic species to dito lang mahahanap sa Pilipinas, ang potentially impacted. So yun talaga yung very concerning ito, not just in the sense na bilang mga environmentalists, of course, kailangan natin pangalagaan yung biodiversity natin dito sa Pilipinas, pero even on the angle of human rights, of course, marami talagang natatapakan na human rights dito. Libo-libong civilians ang impacted, forcibly displaced by these kinds of bombings or placed into, in danger essentially because of these. So yun talaga yung kailangan nating pag-aralan with continued research into this issue.
Okay, Sir John, mabalik ko lang. Paano nyo nalaman yung nangyaring incidents ng bombing doon sa Barangay Lobo, sa Kantilan, Surigao del Sur?
When it comes to that specific incident, and of course other incidents rin na natala namin, it's a mix of yung mga nire-report ng mainstream media, which is unfortunately very little. Minsan hindi ito napipick up. Bukod pa doon ay yung reports from on-ground mismo, people who are reporting to us, yung mga communities na ka-work namin ay minsan nagpapaabot na may nangyayaring ganito. On top of that, of course, is actually some of the research that we've done is look into yung mga press releases and social media pages ng military mismo. Actually, a lot of them would be proud of the work that they do, and sometimes they would post about it. So yun talaga yung parang different ways namin na pagkalap ng information regarding not just the Surigao bombing, pero other bombings as well. Na yun nga, marami na kaming natala over the past few months.
So pag nung nalaman nyo Anong ginawa niyo? Pinuntahan niyo ba kaagad or ano naging process ninyo?
Different ways. Talaga yung approach namin sa research. Of course, a lot of it is desk research kasi yun talaga yung kaya namin at the moment, and yun talaga yung paano natin malalaman kung ano yung mga iba't ibang mga key biodiversity sites na impacted. Some of them also involve yung tinatawag nga ng mga fact-finding missions or pagpunta doon sa area. So we attempted to do that actually in two different places. Hindi natuloy yung isa because of security concerns. Pero yung isa na natuloy, hinarangan rin kami, the one I mentioned sa Cagayan. Yung mga sinubukan naming mas palalim yung understanding ng scale ng impact sa biodiversity. So yun yung mga hinaharap na issues when it comes to research. Again, as I mentioned, hindi talaga transparent when it comes to these kinds of issues. Even in terms of human rights impacts, medyo hindi pa natin talaga alam. Though mas yun yung nababalitaan, di ba? Yung mga numbers of people impacted, etc. Minsan nakakaabot yun kahit sa mainstream media. Pero in terms of ecological impacts, yun talaga yung medyo missing. And when you think about how we're living in an era of climate change, ecological collapse, these are the kinds of information that we need. We need to know. Pero you can't even talk about having a problem if you don't know that there's a problem happening in the first place.
Na-mention mo kanina na meron kayong na-note na 11
Mm.
bombings. Ano, in the
Yes, ma'am.
span of ilang ano yon? Gano'n ba kadalas yung mga
Still,
pangyayaring ganito? At yung 11, ano yung span of ano, ilang months yon since na nangyari?
we started tallying. Actually may mga data pa rin kami actually before that pa. So it's been more than 10, pero we started counting this ever since na umupo si President Marcos Jr. So ever since then, yun nga 11 na yung incidents at the very least. Again, this is only the information that has been available, kumbaga online through yung mga nire-report. Undoubtedly, mas marami pang incidents actually to. Kailangan talaga pumunta sa iba't ibang communities para maalam kung ano ba talaga yung nangyayari. Pero 11 yung incidents, so halos once a month. Pero some of them have been concentrated in some areas. So based nga dun sa research namin, we've seen incidents in the area of Negros, Mindoro, parts of Mindanao, and of course yung northern Luzon areas. A lot of these places actually are very rich in resources. For example, the area in the northern Luzon area, marami talagang mining na nangyayari doon. Bukod pa doon, I mean, mga minerals essentially na possibly pwedeng i-mine, kumbaga. And of course, yung linking it with another issue that we're looking into, yung expansion ng mga tinatawag na EDCA bases ng US ay pwedeng link rin dito sa nangyayaring bombing, pero hindi rin clear kung ano ba talaga yung hantungan or parang pupuntahan ng mga bombing incidents na to. Bukod pa dito is yung area ng Mindanao, of course, matagal na naalam ng marami na very rich yung Mindanao in terms of mineral resources, timber, etc. So these bombings can actually be correlated possibly with openings for essentially clearing the path for different
Mm.
corporations to come in. Kasi yun nga, yung mga civilians or mga nakatira doon sa area, pinapalayas or nag-force evacuate. We can't really say for sure, pero it's definitely something to look into. Kung ano ba talaga yung posibleng, hindi naman direct intention ng bombings, possibly, pero posibleng makinabang yung mga different mga mining, logging, plantation corporations dito sa bombing na to dahil sa mga pinoproduce niya na, yun nga, essentially clearing the pathway in terms of evicting residents or flattening the mountains for whatever projects that want to be put in those areas.
That's so sad to hear. Gagamitin nila yon para lang umalis yung mga tao, and at the same time, na-mention nyo nga, i-clear yung mga area. So yun yung sa
Possibly,
tingin niyo
possibly.
reason, reason. Ano pa kaya yung ibang reason bakit nangyayari itong may mga bombings na ito, especially dun sa ating mga KBAs?
Well, of course, yung sinasabi ng military, either want to get rid of the, ano ba yun? Clear the area of rebels or kung ano man. Pero none of the bombings that we've recorded actually have hit a rebel camp. Wala sa ni isa dun sa mga bombings na record namin. So in that note, yung nagagawa lang talaga ng bombings na to, yun nga, panakot sa mga residents, nagpapalayas, tapos yung pagsira nga sa kalikasan. And the troubling thing is, fina-follow up rin yung bombings na to with further militarization in the area. So minsan yun nga, yung mga communities hindi na nakakabalik dun sa mga areas na tinutuluyan nila,
Right.
or yung pinanggalingan nila dahil ginagawang kampuhan, or they get back pero since kampuhan nga yung area ay parang may curfew sila and all these different human rights violations na kailangan ring aralin. So very interconnected tong lahat, and ultimately um yun, it can, as I mentioned earlier, it can be sort of like clearing the pathway for different projects. Ipalalim ko lang yung binanggit ko earlier dun sa isang potentially nangyayari dun sa upper area ng Northern Luzon, kung bakit maraming bombings rin doon. Actually, 3 ata yung na-record namin na bombings in recent months dun sa area ng Northern Luzon. And we were able to get first-hand testimonies from people on the ground sharing what happened in that area, yung maraming nangyayari dong mga human rights violations. And ultimately, based on sa developments within that area, we think that the bombing in that area is linked to the expansion of US military bases nga in the Philippines, which is another problem altogether. We can look at the history, may history rin of environmental disasters associated with US military presence actually. Yung toxic pollution from the Subic Bay bases, etc. So, posibleng manganak pa sa iba pang mga environmental problems, yung environmental problem na nga ng pagbobomba indiscriminately dito sa mga areas na to. So talagang it's a disaster in the making ko, kumbaga, or already a disaster right now, pero you can see how that can even get worse as we move forward. So talagang kailangan bantayan yung mga ganitong developments so that hopefully magkaroon ng mga pagbabago, maitigil yung mga ganitong klaseng mga military operations, and of course, ma-protect and ma-conserve natin yung biodiversity natin dito sa Pilipinas.
Hindi lang tayo on the defensive side, no? Kasi parang feeling ko pag may nangyari, saka lang tayo tutugon.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yes, buti na mention mo na may prevention din kayo na ginagawa. So, kailangan talaga maging mapagmatsyag para
Yes, true.
para malaman tayo. Pero ilan yung organizations na partner ninyo all throughout the country? Kasi parang sa dinami-dami ng KBEs natin, sa dinami-dami ng ating mga hindi nga siya kaya nung ano, 'di ba, kahit we have forest guards, we have hindi sobrang laki niya at sobrang dami niya. So how do you keep it in place? How do you keep everything in one place? Kasi parang ang laki-laki, no? Yung ano
Uh,
ng inyong sako. How do you do this?
Definitely. And actually, of course, proseso siya. Yung Kalikasan, for example, has roughly 40 or 45 organizational partners across the Philippines. And a lot of them, of course, we're able to connect with, and ito yung mga nakakuha namin mga iba't ibang mga reports. A lot of them, of course, are also facing the thing, of course, with environmental defenders in the Philippines. Talagang mahirap rin yung trabaho ng mga environmental defenders, lalo na sa front line. So some of the organizations we link with are actually having problems. So kailangan rin harapin yun. So it's always like a shifting na parang situation. Kumbaga, we really have to adapt as we move along kasi iba't iba talaga yung mga problema na hinaharap ng mga partners namin on the ground. So definitely it's not smooth and definitely it's not easy. That's why I'm
Right.
saying whatever I'm saying right now, yung mga 11 cases of bombings, etc., yung numbers na binabanggit ko, that's just the tip of the iceberg talaga. Kasi
Right.
talagang mas marami talagang nangyayari, hindi na lang natin alam or hindi nababalita sa mainstream media or kung saan. So kailangan talaga pumunta sa mga areas at sa akin lang, matulungan rin yung mga organizations in those areas na umangkop, kasi sila mismo are the ones impacted by these kinds of attacks. So you can imagine na kapag nasa mapanganib na situation sila, hindi nila mababalita to, di ba? Yung mga ganung mga incidences rin na kailangan rin maging that we have to be aware about. So mas yun, again, back to your question, hindi siya madali. If
Right.
anything, ito lang talaga yung kaya natin gawin for now, pero hopefully moving forward, we can again build more solidarity, work with more organizations that are also working nationally, for example. Hopefully ma-expose talaga natin yung ganitong issue na nangyayari kasi critical talaga siya, I think, for our biodiversity and for for the rights of our communities na impacted by these incidents.
Sa ganitong kalaking gawain, no? Kasi you'll have to do research, may kailangan bumaba,
Mhm.
Iba pa yung mga yung issue ng mga environmental defenders. I'm wondering kung where do you get the funds in doing your work? Sorry to ask. Pero it's very important bago kayo makababa, kailangan kailangan ng mobilization.
Okay, doon naman sa part na yun, of course, we have a few partners naman who are helping us. Um, may mga ka-network kami na international groups that have been helping us with some of this. Pero a lot of the work that has been done actually, particularly with this campaign, has been more in response to the fact na kailangan talaga natin malaman to eh. So hindi siya usapin ng kung may rekurso tayo or wala. Pero mas kailangan natin magpasulpot or maghanap ng paraan para makapunta dun sa areas or para malaman or we try to squeeze in yung capacity natin kahit sobrang daming hinahandle na iba-ibang mga campaigns ay maisama rin yung gantong klaseng research na maisabay para mailabas yung gantong klaseng analysis. Kasi it's sorely lacking. Again, as I mentioned earlier, parang ito pa lang yung gantong klaseng synthesis when it comes to the impacts of the military on biodiversity potentially. So, ayun, on that note, of course, very open naman kami sa any support that other people might be able to give. Of course, you can just message our page if you feel so inclined na supportahan yung ganitong klaseng mga initiatives namin. And we would definitely make sure na any support that goes our way will be put to good use. So mas yun talaga yung kailangan natin as of the moment. Working more together, more closely together, and trying to expand and really make this research more robust para ma-ensure talaga natin na aware tayo dun sa problem. At pwede natin talagang, and once we're aware with the problem, pwede natin talagang pag-isipan kung ano ba yung solutions natin na kailangan gawin.
So Sir John, yung na-mention din ninyo, kasi nagkaroon na ng mga ganitong incidences in the past, no? Saan siya napupunta? Like pagkatapos na nating makuha yung mga data, ano ba natin siya? What do we do with what we have? With yung data natin? Anong sinasampahan ba natin ng kaso? Para alam mo yun, para matuto sila, para hindi na maulit. What do we do with that?
Totoo naman yan. And the thing is, marami naman tayong iba't ibang mga, what do you call this? Avenues of approach or angles of attack, kumbaga, dito sa problema na to. So, of course, in-explore pa namin and part of the work talaga that we're finalizing right now at this moment is making this research as robust as it can be. Para when we put it forward, for example, pwede nating i-explore yung magkaroon ng mga Senate or congressional na investigations into these
Right.
kinds of incidents, di ba? So mapadalo yung mga representatives from the military or kung sino man, and of course bring together community testimonies as well para malaman talaga kung ano nangyayari, kung ano yung scale of impacts. So yun yung isang posibleng gawin, kumbaga. Yung isa pa na iniisip rin namin, of course, this is still in very early stages, is look forward to what bills or policies can we put forward in the Congress and Senate level para ma-ensure na maprotektahan, for example, yung mga key biodiversity areas natin or yung mga national parks natin from these kinds of destructive attacks, di ba? So yung mga pwedeng explore talaga na different avenues of approach para yun nga, hindi lang ma-hold accountable kung sino man yung nag-order ng mga ganitong klaseng mga military operations, pero looking forward ay magkaroon na tayo ng proactive steps para maprotektahan pa yung mga ganitong klaseng area. So talagang mix of different approaches yan eh. And ultimately, yung gusto talaga namin sa Kalikasan is matulungan yung mga communities on the ground. Yun talaga yung isa pang aspect na kailangan nating pag-isipan. So paano natin sila matutulungan in terms of safeguarding their human rights? Compensation rin dun sa malamang mga economic na impacts ng ganitong klaseng mga incidents, di ba? So, bahagi rin yun ng proseso na siguro mas case to case or mas tailor fit dun sa iba't ibang mga communities depending on their experiences. Pero yun, it really just goes back to the fact na kailangan natin, again, malaman kung ano ba talaga yung nangyayari and being able to go there, having the liberty to go there and really investigate independently what's happening. So mas yun talaga yung pinag-iisipan right now. Paano natin talaga ma-ensure na alam natin yung issue before we start, pushing for solutions.
Yeah, talagang muna talaga research-based, science-based, lahat para meron tayong basihan. at
Yes.
babalikan, no? At
Mhm.
kung matanong ko lang din, Sir John, kung may international humanitarian law na nagpoprotekta ng mga tao sa panahon ng mga giyera, sa mga panahon ng
Mm.
mga ganito, mayroon bang polisiya o batas na nagpoprotekta sa kalikasan sa ganitong sitwasyon? Would you know? I'm not sure if you're familiar with the rights of nature na pinupush ng
Mm.
PMPI.
Bukod dun sa in terms of yung issues like ecocide and all of that, na posibleng mangyari when it comes to these kinds of military operations, yung malawakang pagsira sa kalikasan, the very least, it's not as robust as yung international humanitarian law natin. There might be there, I'm not sure if signatory yung Pilipinas doon, pero regardless of whether or not signatory sila, ay clear naman na parang hindi naman
Mm-mm.
sinusunod with what's happening,
Right.
and that's really concerning, of course. So definitely, there should be something around the protection of the environment. I'm aware
Right.
talaga na kasi a lot of these incidents or yung for example yung pagsira or pagwasak ng mga ng ecosystems or for example yung nangyari just to give like a historical example kung saan nanggaling yung term na ecocide na sinasabi, yun yung nangyari kasi doon sa Vietnam nung binuhusan ng mga ng herbicide yung buong Vietnam, 'di ba? Para
Mhm.
mamatay yung lahat ng mga palayan and of course all the different the biodiversity in that area during the Vietnam War. Doon nanggaling yung term na ecocide. So what's happening here, we have to know first and foremost kung ano ba talaga yung scale of what's happening. Pero on top of that, kailangan mas maging precautionary tayo in the sense na very fragile kasi yung ecosystems natin.
Mm-mm.
Especially if you have these kinds of very brute force na treatment na indiscriminate bombing. We don't even know what can happen.
Yeah, I think malaki ang magagawa ng rights of nature dun sa inyong advocacy kasi parang counterpart siya ng human rights. Pero ito
Mm-mm.
ay rights ng nature. So marami siyang actually this is naka-lobby siya na bill
Mm-mm.
na syempre at pangunahing advocacy ng PMPI na yung nagpe-prevent din actually siya, may prevention siya, and at the same time, kung meron mang nangyari na um, mga mga destructive activities sa environment, there should be real compensation, no? At saka accountability, yun yung sinusulong ng RON. So, kung we can partner, we can partner kasi swak na swak ang ating mga advocacies. Okay, yeah. So ano po ba yung pwede nating gawin, Sir John, pagdating sa ganito? Kasi iilan lang din tayo na mga may advocacies na ganito. What sa tingin mo, with your very young but experienced mind? Yeah, so ano yun yung sa tingin mo, how do we move forward? Kasi ang dami pa ring bombings na nangyayari na ganito, no, as you mentioned.
So,
Yes.
I think part of this is having kind of discussions like this talaga nakakatulong to. Kasi ito yung popularization pagpapalala rin ng understanding ng general public na may gantong issue. Ito rin yung gusto
Mhm.
rin namin masubukan more systematically siguro in the next few months. Really making sure that more people are aware about the link of increased militarization, indiscriminate bombing, dun sa impact sa environment. Again, talagang synergy yan, more robust research, more comprehensive na reaching out to different folks, hopefully moving
Mhm.
towards continued development of this campaign. And then, well, pwede naman, even now, pero of course, as we move forward, talagang mas nadaming opportunities. Doon talaga lilitaw, kumbaga, yung mga possible ways of engaging or addressing this issue para magkaroon nga ng accountability or magkaroon nga ng compensation where needed. Mas yun yung kailangan natin gawin. So actually, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share this campaign and these
Right.
issues dito sa program ninyo. Pero moving forward, hopefully nga, mas marami pa tayong mga hikayat ng mga individuals and of course, other organizations as well around their campaign to ultimately protect the environment and of course, protect human rights in the process.
Maraming salamat, Sir John. So, sa maigsing panahon, marami tayong natutunan and we hope na magkaroon pa tayo ng more partners, more people to join your advocacy and PMPI can be here to partner with you. Maraming salamat and more
Alright.
power to Kalikasan PNE.
Thank you rin po and maraming salamat rin sa PMPI.
Ayon sa pag-aaral, at least 7 major biodiversity areas and forest reserves ang napahamak at nanganganib dahil sa AFP bombing and shelling from June 2022 to the present. At least 62 endemic species at mahigit 500,000 hectares of key biodiversity areas ang naapektuhan, tulad ng mga bundok at kagubatan sa Bukidnon, Cagayan, Kalinga, Occidental Mindoro, Oriental Mindoro, Negros Occidental, and Negros Oriental. Dapat maaksyonan agad ang insidente at aktibidades na ito at itigil na ang mga kaganapan dahil ang pagwasak ng kalikasan ang lalong magpapahirap sa buhay ng mga tao. Ako po, si Pia Noriela Bastilla. Stop bombing nature. Stop destroying our ecosystems, the source of all life. Maraming salamat po.